All right. And we're recording. All right, everyone, welcome to this Leadfeeder webinar. I'm going to share my screen and we will get started. Flip mode. Great. Awesome. So thank you everyone for coming to this webinar, this Leadfeeder webinar on how to close out Q4 and prospect in Q1. Today, we were featured with a bunch of different panel of experts, all related to sales. So I'd like to introduce you to Dale Dupree. Sorry if I pronounced your last name wrong. So he's got over 15 years of experience. The last two have been fully dedicated to the Sales Rebellion. As the leader of the Sales Rebellion, he offers one-to-one sales coaching, sales and training, mentorships, anything related to sales, you name it, Dale's done it. He's also the host of Selling Local podcast, where he tells stories and discusses ideas of all things related to sales, whether you're B2C, B2B. He also enjoys pancakes and watching The Office. I found out about that. He's also located in Orlando, Florida, where I'm actually based in Tampa. So nice to see another Floridian. Up next, we've got Daniel. He's the VP of Sales at correct me, Daniel, can you pronounce this for me? I'm having a little brutal
Proposify.
Proposify, thank you. He's had over 10 years of experience in marketing and sales. Daniel, I was actually pretty impressed by your resume to see all the marketing jobs you have. So you and I have very similar backgrounds. And you're also located in Halifax in Canada. Then we've got Michael, founder of Genie. We've actually collaborated a lot with Michael in the past, been on our B2B Rebellion our videos, our webinars, and we actually just partnered with Michael on this awesome outbound sales cadence piece. He created this 30 touch point outbound sales cadence. It's awesome. I recommend everyone to check it out. It's also located in the UK. Then we've got Niraj. He's had over 25 years of selling experience, author of 2 amazing bestseller books on Amazon related to sales. And his approach to selling really kind of connects with me from a content perspective, because he really comes at it from an empathetic position. So he's got a ton of great insight, and he's located in Ireland. A little bit about me. I am the head of content here at Leadfeeder. I work really closely with Andy Culligan, the CMO. So it's a little bit about me. And let's get this kicked off. So first question up. I'd love to know from the panel, how would you describe 2020 in a paragraph? Who's up? Niraj, you want to jump in on this one?
Yep, sure. I had to make notes because it was such an important question. I could do it in one paragraph. So 2020, I would describe as challenging, frustrating, unpredictable, and lonely. At the same time, it created new opportunities, new revenue streams I never thought of, massive transformation and growth.
What kind of new revenue streams were you thinking of? What can you kind of expand on those different channels?
Well, yeah, up until March this year, I made my money going into companies and doing LinkedIn training, sales training, speaking at events, and then only 10% was book royalties. And in the first lockdown, everything went except the book royalties. So all events were canceled. All my clients in London were put on furlough. So I literally had no work, and it was kind of scary. So I rebuilt very, very quickly. And within 6 weeks, my second book was due out in July. I released that in April. Because I spent 2 years building my profile on LinkedIn, it sold well. I was then approached by a publisher to write an ebook, which did well. But I thought, okay, what do I do long term? So I started doing monthly sales masterclasses every single month. I started £5, £10, £21, £47. Now I'm charging £97, which is about $130 per masterclass. I've never ran masterclasses like this before. I did a high profile mastermind group over the summer where I had 6 people, business owners, taking a hot seat every week, and all the business owners would get together and help them generate more sales for their team. These are things I never thought I could do. So these are just great ways of generating new revenue that I hadn't thought about before.
That's awesome. That's so cool. That's great to hear. I'm just curious from the other group, Dale, do you have any insight on how you would describe 2020 in a paragraph?
I feel like at this point I could write a book on 2020, but I would say that for me, 2020 was kind of optional, right? Like, am I going to participate or not? Was really the question that me and everybody at the Sales Rebellion asked ourselves. Are we going to participate in everything that's going on or not? And just as a general rule of thumb, as rebels, we always ask ourselves that question, right? When something's going down, are we going to participate in this or not? And now I'm not talking about wearing masks. I got mine right here, right? But the idea is that everybody was in this mode of survival. And for us, it was about, well, how do we innovate? How do we build ourselves up? How do we stay connected with our families? How do we keep a good head on our shoulders? How do we support and help our mental health during this time as well too, and stay very cognizant of the things that truly do matter? Sales is sales. Sales is life for us, right? Like we believe everybody's in sales. Teachers sell structure, brokers sell networks, buyers sell themselves, right? And because of that thought, it's easy for us to just have this living, breathing entity when it comes to sales inside of our own internal system, right? So like if you were to look at culture, for example, like Dale Dupree's culture, it is one of servant leadership. My father passed that down to me through his teachings. And so sitting back and saying like, how do we serve right now during this time? Because sales is service. That's what we doubled down on. We doubled down on this idea of being able to identify ourselves and what we were doing during this process instead of becoming part of the noise and playing the empathy card and emailing people about how we really care about them, but here's a 10% off code because we're broke, or whatever everybody was sending out. And instead really just stepped up to the plate and said, let's be a part of this with everybody else. And if we have to suffer, we'll suffer alongside our community. And if we can thrive, then we'll bring people with us. And that's what we did. We 6x'd our business over the course of the pandemic. So
Wow, that's huge. That's awesome. How did you, you said you didn't take the empathetic approach and you just kind of like went through and drove with them. Did you have to change like any of your sales pitches or your email templates, or was it really just, relationship building and how you position that?
yeah, to clarify that statement, we were already using empathy. I've been using that empathetic approach from day one of being a human being. And so I think that for most, because they looked at it as like, well, what is this empathy thing? That it became a play. But for us, it was the same old thing that we've been doing. And so we stayed in that boat with people. And we didn't have to ask people like, how are you today? Instead, we let them know that we cared, just like we have been this entire time that we've been in existence as a company, and that I've been in existence as a human. The same kind of communication of empathy is really just a shared experience, right? More than anything. It's not sitting there trying to pretend that you can, relate to somebody, but it's to share experiences with them. And so giving them feedback on what we were doing and how we could support them, wasn't about pitching anymore. It was just about gaining traction. Hey, we've got a free event. Come out, meet people, sell something, hire people, like whatever that looks like for you, but come and do and be a part of what we are building in the first place. So really, we just became more of a sanctuary, more of a kingdom for all the rebels out there that are looking for a voice, through a naturally already existing empathetic approach that we have.
Can I add something there about empathy? This was actually a really fascinating thing to, like, as a sales leader, getting prospected by people during this year. What I figured out is, like, most people don't know what empathy is. They rely on sympathy. They're like, oh, I feel bad that these things are happening to you. And that's not empathy at all. Like, that's just sympathy. Like, oh, I hope you and your family's okay. Like, yeah, great. That was an opening line for 2 weeks, and then it became completely irrelevant. But the best people that prospected me, I found they really understood empathy. And like what Dale was saying, like if they knew it ahead of time, they continue to it. So like messages like, hey, I get it, as a sales leader, it's really hard for you to hit your number right now. Leads are precious, nothing's closing. Like, here's how we can help. That's true empathy, of like putting yourself in that person's shoes and understanding what they are going through. So it was a really fascinating thing this year to actually like experience that, and just salespeople just in general becoming more empathetic and kind of being forced to do it.
Oh, that's great,
Yeah.
Daniel. Thank you for adding to that. Daniel, while you're talking, I'm just curious, how would you describe 2020?
So I'm going to try to do it in one sentence.
Okay.
I think 2020 was a forcing function to get better at sales.
Well said. How have you gotten better at sales over 2020? How was it forced you to?
So when every lead is precious and everything is being scrutinized and there are more C-suite involved in deals than ever before, and CFOs are looking at the numbers and all that stuff, you just have to have a flawless execution everywhere. That includes your discovery, that includes how you follow up, that includes just little things that you didn't pay attention to, like how easy is your paperwork process to go through. Like there are a bunch of different things that just salespeople in general just had to get really, really, really good at this year if they even had a shot at hitting a number.
That's great. Oh, go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, sorry, Anna. I was just going to pop in on that point because I think what Dan said is a great point, that people have had to get better at sales essentially, because there's a lot more white noise on email, on LinkedIn, and also, a lot of businesses aren't doing very well. They don't have the budgets. And like Dale was saying, it's like, well, if you weren't being empathetic before March, then what were you doing? You weren't doing sales right. Sales has always been about empathy. It's not like, hey, suddenly we're in a pandemic, we need to be more empathetic. It's the way good sales has always been. And I think for me to answer the question, again, I don't know technically how long a paragraph is, so I may be over a paragraph, maybe under. But for me, it's actually been a time to look inward. And when I say look inward, I don't actually mean, make it about you and what you sell, but how it like you helping your customers. So I think take it deep, like even away from business. I think before the pandemic, we were all like rushing around. We were all traveling, I think unnecessarily a lot of the time. I think salespeople were traveling around the world to meetings, to meet someone, to close a deal, traveling like 10 hours on a plane, and it wasn't necessary. We probably could have done it on Zoom. I do think there's benefits to face-to-face sales, but I think essentially we've been sitting at home all this time, and not just from a work perspective, but in every perspective, we're kind of like looking at ourselves, because we're like, you can't escape, you can't travel the world, you can't go see friends in bars. So when it comes to a business perspective, it's like, okay, what are we really good at? And what are you really good at is like, what's the biggest impact you're having on your customers? Who are your best customers, right? And then talk to them, interview them, make sure you keep them happy as well, because they're like the core of your business. And then essentially work out what the pains are that you're helping them with, and then target people who are similar to that and use messaging that they've told you, that your customers have told you. For me, that's kind of long paragraph about 2020.
No, that's really great insight, Michael. Thank you for sharing that. Have you seen your Q4 of 2020 different than the year before? I know, like Dan, you mentioned like leads are precious. So does that mean like fewer leads are coming in, or fewer quality leads? How does Q4 look to last year or the year before?
I think for our business, we're a very young business. We've only been around 15 months. So probably Dan and Niraj and Dale can talk a bit more about that. But just in terms of Q4 in general, like the feeling I'm getting, it's funny actually, because you were talking about Andy earlier, the CMO of Leadfeeder. We had a discussion in this, just before the summer, so probably like June. And I was saying to him that I felt like this summer would be slightly different, because like in Europe in August, a little bit in North America, but more in Europe, like everything kind of shuts down. It's very quiet. A lot of people are on holiday. And I said, I don't think that's going to happen this year. Like people are in lockdown. I think people are just going to be working more. But actually I noticed the same trend, and Andy was the one who predicted it, because he said, look, people are going to need holiday more than ever, because they've been stuck at home like all year. And even if they just go like to the countryside in their own country, or they have a staycation and they're staying at home and they just won't work for a week, that's really important. And I found that people have needed holiday more than ever. And then the reason I'm mentioning this is when it comes to Q4, essentially what we've seen is very similar patterns. So we had quite a quiet summer, and then essentially like January to November has been brilliant for us. We've had lots of pipeline, lots of deals closing. So I think I find now is a really important time, especially if you're like doing outbound or you're an SDR. I think November is a really important time while people are preparing budgets. And then I think December can be quite a tough time for SDRs, but it's a good time for like AEs to close business. I think it's like October, November, September, building that pipeline, and then like December closing it. That's historically the pattern I've seen throughout my years in sales, and I'm actually seeing the same thing this year. It hasn't been too different.
That's really interesting. And especially that you mentioned the summer thing, because we tick that up too, that more people would take personal vacations but just stay local and they work a lot more. Has anyone else seen any patterns like that throughout this year or in Q4? How does Q4 look for everyone else? Niraj?
Mine's a bit different to what Michael has said. So every year, you start preparing for Q4 around about September. And this year, that's not quite happening. Apart from my clients in pharma and my clients in the SaaS industries who are doing very well at the moment, and they're doing amazing. The rest of my clients are in sectors that are really struggling. So for a lot of people, it's about seeing the year out and preparing for 2020. Personally, as a business owner and running a sales training company, October was actually surprisingly quiet because we've just gone into a recession. A lot of people are nervous. We're about to have a second lockdown in November, and a lot of people are very edgy. Whereas November, people are really getting on with it. And this is probably the best month I've had this year since January. So November is really exciting. I have more inquiries than ever, and I have more coaching clients than ever. Whereas October, I was genuinely nervous. Like, what am I supposed to do here? So normally, Q4 is like this. It just gets more and more exciting, more and more intense. And this year, October was bad. November's been amazing. What's going to happen in December? I don't know. I do know that if you want to have success in 2021, you don't start in 2021. You got to be starting now, and you really got to be thinking about it now.
That's a great point. You're right. In order to get prepared for 2021, you need to start kicking it up gears this time around. Dan, how about you? How are things looking for Q4 this year compared to last year, the years before?
Yeah, Q4 is very different this year compared to last year. So like I said, every lead is precious at this point. So like inbound flows have been up and down all year, which is something that's usually pretty consistent in Q4. Like you get a huge spike of inbounds, like all that stuff. The place that we've found a lot more success, though, is on the outbound side, partially because we hired Michael Hanson here and he's awesome at what he does. But people are very receptive. Like they're building their plans for next year. I think what Niraj mentioned around like, hey, people are kind of sitting out the year, just kind of figuring out, okay, what's going to happen, and then really, really getting ready for 21. We see that in our pipeline a lot now too. Like we have a pretty decent pipeline for December, but a lot of people are saying like, hey, yeah, we want to start off 21 strong. So I expect there's going to be a lot of kind of deals pushing that could slip. So it goes back to my first point around like, we just need to be a lot better at sales this year. Ask the right questions, because a deal could easily go from December to January if we're not really meticulous about what we're doing from an execution perspective.
That's awesome. That's really great insight, Dan.
Actually,
Yeah. Dale, what about you?
Yeah, what we've been noticing the most is that like really right now in the midst of what's happening is that people are looking toward experiences more so than pitches. And that it's extremely effective for everybody that's out there in the sales capacity, that instead of just doing traditional follow-up and, their grandfather sales, as we like to say, that instead they're giving like the Disney experience in everything that they do, that people are feeling this culture that they live and breathe as a salesperson, and that they can see that salesperson fitting into their internal society, that they've built at their company. So that ecosystem that they have as well. So the experience portion of sales has been lost for so long and for so many years. And a lot of people think that it's gimmicks, right? More so than anything, but it's not. It's about true connection. It's about using human psychology, understanding the environment that we're all in right now as a world, not just like one state or one country, right? We're all going through some pretty crazy BS right now. And because of things like that, it's easier to create familiarity. And in creating familiarity, and people have that sense of recognition in those moments, they feel more inclined to respond, more inclined to discuss, more inclined to negotiate a deal with you, which, again, like I'm just using those as kind of trigger points for salespeople more than anything, because I don't believe in negotiations at all. However, it's the concept of getting people to respond in 2020 is like what's lost to salespeople. Like, I can't get anybody to respond right now. That's because 177 times your C-level decision maker gets touched in some form: email, phone call, voice message, DM, carrier pigeon, smoke signal. I mean, salespeople are like the bloodthirsty hounds of the business world at this point in 2020, and it's apparent, and it's just as apparent as it was in the boiler room days right now, and it's kind of freaky because we shouldn't be going backwards in these moments. We should be standing tall for what sales is and what we believe in as salespeople and the experiences that we do provide and why we're different. And I think really, like, right now more than anything, and I agree with the boys in that it is extremely important for salespeople not to disconnect and say, oh, it's the end of the year. Oh, it's pandemic time. Oh, there was just an election and half the country's bummed out and most of the world is excited. You know, like, you can't sit around and use all these excuses for why not to sell, right? Because sales is life if you really truly are looking at it in the most pure form to begin with. And so having the tenacity to be able to work your butt off while also being able to balance, you know, what it is that you love and what it is that you're doing. And what I would say to that is loving what you're doing. When those things are translated appropriately to your prospect, you're winning more. We've got guys and girls in the rebellion right now, students that I don't even know how they're getting what they're getting. I'm just being honest. I mean, it's insane. We brainstorm some ideas, we do a couple things, and it's almost like, oh my God, I did not expect that to happen. But that's the point, right? Is that we should all be having those moments of recognition of our status as a unicorn as salespeople, figuring out that part of what makes us tick really well and what connects our tribe to us, and doubling down. And experiences is where it starts. And anybody that's giving them in Q4, not only do they have a Q1 lined up, they have a Q1, 2, 3 lined up, you know, in the year 2021 right now, I guarantee you.
Talking of experiences, I love Dale's background as well. He's creating an experience right now in this webinar because I'm feeling jealous that we don't have a growth Genie background like he's got for the sales experience, for the sales rebellion. So it's a good example of creating a mini experience there.
That is cool. I do like your background, Dale. That's awesome. Dale, you mentioned a lot of different touch points for salespeople in Q4 and going into 2021. Do you have any tips for people on, or areas to focus on that you're advising people based on what you know into what happened in 2020 and then now going into 2021?
I really truly think that a lot of it evolves around your mindset as a salesperson. That it's kind of like we were talking about earlier, the difference between empathy and sympathy right now. Like, in salespeople always kind of have this empathy sympathy fight happening within them. You know, they think, man, have I followed up too many times with this person? Well, the answer is no. But really what you got to look at is you got to look at, have I given the right experience? Because if you're just sending boring, crappy, stale emails, then you suck. And you got to sit back and recognize that. As an early salesperson, I sucked. I was terrible for 2 years. I was clawing my way to quota. As crazy as that thought is, I was. But once I tapped into this idea of the mindset of a successful salesperson, that sales is this natural progression for anybody and everybody, that suddenly I was able to tap into that whole line of communication, those follow-ups, the experiences that I give. And what salespeople really need to do as a tangible takeaway here is they need to create a living pipeline. They need to throw out their old, rusty, crappy, leaking funnel, and they need to create something that is alive and that understands the ecosystem of the buyer, and that builds on the relationship, because people buy from people they like. They might think that, you know, Proposify has a better product than, you know, some other person out there, you know, shoveling third-party proposal softwares, right? Like, they might say, like, Proposify is awesome, and so I'm going to buy from them. But how much better when the salesperson is awesome and they like them? Because not only do they then buy this awesome product, but then they buy it from somebody that they enjoy the experience with through that process, and they become loyal in those moments as well too, because it's a human interaction piece, that an element that we're missing. And in 2020, it's so prevalent. We were just talking about this, the guys were just talking about this idea of things that we could do that were different, you know, such as having a Zoom like we're doing right now, you know, in the form even of a public talk, right? Or a meeting with somebody, you know, 6 states away or a country away that typically you would fly for a dinner and some schmoozing, right? You can just do on a Zoom now, and you can have so much more efficiency inside of that concept as well too. And that's what it's all about. It's about being efficient as salespeople. We're inefficient as salespeople. Like, sending an email just to send an email is a load of crap. And you should get away from that. You should stop making excuses for yourself that no, sales is this way. This is how salespeople do it. And you should start putting purpose and reason behind everything that you do and be driven by those things. And by doing that, by creating this ecosystem, that this pipeline that lives, you'll view people instead of the product, instead of the buyer, instead of the cycle.
That's a really interesting point that you make, to have the active pipeline and then to be active and you create the relationship with the actual person. I actually had someone pitch me earlier this year on LinkedIn, and it didn't really work out. It was kind of like a salesy tactic, but then he emailed me a picture of his dog and said, I'm an avid dog lover. I have 3 dogs. And he said, Anna, this is my dog. And then he was like, told me about my 3 dogs, all of their names. Clearly he had stalked me on Instagram or something. And after that, I ended up buying the product just because of how great that relationship was. I could tell he took the extra step, and I'm still interacting with him just because of the connection I developed with that person, not necessarily his product. And it was amazing and totally worth it. Michael, I'm curious from you, based on everything that you've learned in 2020, do you have any specific areas that you're pushing people to focus on in 2021?
Yeah, I think it's really the same. Often, like, technology changes, some of the channels change, but I think the basics of sales stay the same. Like Dale was just talking about it here, like you create relationships with people, essentially, like people buy from people, right? So I can give an example. So a few years ago, before I set up my own company at my last job, we were assessing a account-based marketing solution. And we were looking at like 4 or 5 vendors. We put it down to 3. And essentially one of the salespeople was a guy called Alec McNeese. And he was brilliant because he not only created a very good relationship with me, he did it with like the 4 other stakeholders in the buying process. And I remember the first call we had with all of these people, right? At the time, we were a US company, but most of us were like in Colombia, either living majority of the time in Colombia, or we had a headquarters in Colombia. 2 of the people that we spoke to said, oh yeah, Colombia, like Pablo Escobar, Narcos, all that stuff. And they hadn't thought of the fact that if we live in Colombia, we're not probably in Colombia to do like Pablo Escobar and Netflix and all this stuff. Probably if we're like American and British guys living in Colombia, we probably like really like Colombia, right? So the guy that really stood out was someone that said, oh yeah, like how's Colombia? I've heard it's really good. Was like very inquisitive about Colombia, rather than the experience they'd had like watching Netflix at home. They didn't want to listen, they didn't want to hear about Colombia. They just wanted to tell us about what was their experience listening online. Obviously after that as well, because he had that mindset that he was curious, he created a very good buying journey, right? He created a good relationship with me. He created a good relationship with the other stakeholders. So I think that's the number one thing, is to stay curious about the people you're selling to, stay top of mind with them, be reaching out to them at least like 2 or 3 times a week. And again, it's not always like, oh, did you see my proposal? Or like, can we get on a call? It's like you mentioned, like, oh, your dogs. Like, I like your dogs. Like, here's my dog. Like, create relationships at a business level, but also at a personal level, because people buy from people. So I think that's always been the case, like pre-pandemic. And yeah, continue doing that into next year as well.
That's really great insight, Michael. I love that, to always stay curious. That's really nice. I'm going to turn that into an article now. Thank you. Dan, I'm curious about you. After everything you know about 2020 and moving into 2021 into Q1, how are things changing? Do you have any specific areas you're focused on?
Yeah, so we sell to sales leaders, so I feel like I get to learn a lot about what's going to be the next thing for us in sales, and how to even get better at sales, just because we work with so many salespeople. Where it's going to come down to next year is really 2 things from a sales leader's perspective. It's skills and systems. Those are the 2 things that we're going to focus on, because I'll kind of tell you a story. I used to work at this other startup. We had a VP of sales that came from kind of a bit more old school of like, hey, if we're not hitting numbers, let's just throw more bodies at it. Let's throw more budget at it. We'll hire more AEs, and then we're going to increase their quota, but then marketing needs to provide more leads because we hired 20 more AEs and we don't have enough leads. Like, that system was fine-ish for if you had a ton of money, right? The thing that we noticed this year, like selling to sales leaders, is that they're not hiring as much. They are not spending money. They're not throwing budget at stuff. Like the boards and CFOs want to have a healthy cash a balance because they don't want to have to, not be able to pay their payroll and that kind of stuff. So when you think about the dynamics of that next year, it's going to be really, really hard to throw bodies at the problem. So if you're not reaching your numbers, then you have to look at a couple things. And really, there's only two things to do. It's, do my people have the right skills to execute on what they need? And do we have the right systems in place? Like, I'll give you a good example. We were working this deal a couple of weeks ago where there was a proposal writer that was basically writing everybody's proposals on the sales team, and the sales team was growing, they were selling and all that stuff. But that person became a bottleneck. Any other year, they would have hired a second proposal writer, but because they don't want the extra headcount and add that risk to the company, they are looking at technology to make that one proposal writer basically have the efficiency of 3 or 4, right? So that's how sales leaders are approaching basically their plan for next year. It's like, what can I do? What's the highest number that I can get with the least amount of people? And if I'm not going to be hiring a ton more people, then where are the places that I need to invest to make these people basically overproduce?
That's awesome. That's really great insights, Dan. Thank you for sharing that. Niraj, I'll come to you. Do you see anything impacting that you learned from 2020 to 2021 into Q1? Any specific areas of focus for you?
Yeah, I agree with a lot with what the panelists said, 100%. So in addition to that, I would say the two main things are taking care of your mental health and getting better in sales. So I'll start with the latter one first. Dan at Proposify did a great post on LinkedIn last year saying, if you want to succeed in sales, read 2 books a month. And it's so true. Now, at the moment, I read 2 books a month, one on sales, usually one on personal development, but I listen to at least 3 podcasts a week. I speak to my team of sales professionals who I really admire and respect every month. I don't speak to them by email. I pick up the phone. I speak to Daniel Disney. I speak to Chris Murray. We're all good friends. We exchange ideas, what's working, what's not working. I am constantly learning and growing in sales all the time. I have a coach that works with me once a month to make me better. After all these years, I'm still getting coached. So, and what surprises me is every day I get cold called by people who sell to me. And the quality of cold calling and prospecting has not improved in 2021. That shocks me. And for me, that's really inexcusable. People should, I want to get great sales calls. I genuinely do. I want someone to cold call me and me go, that was brilliant. That was so good. That's the gold standard. But I don't. I get people saying dumb things. It's like, hi, how are you? How was your weekend? I'm like, come on, seriously, are we still doing this? You've got to raise your standards when it comes to learning and when it comes to sales. You just have to. All your competition are learning so much at the moment. I know 10 salespeople last month who spent £800, which is about $1,100 American dollars, on Tony Robbins' 4-day UPW event. I went to Tony Robbins 4 years ago in London. It was amazing. Life-changing experience. And your competition are learning. Your competition are absorbing podcasts. Your competition are reading books. If you're not doing this and you're not getting better, you are failing horribly. And you're doing this industry, which I love, a disservice. So please stop it. The second thing you have to do is improve your mental health. That is key. I, for the first time in my life, went through a serious mental health battle this year. After 21 years, I got divorced. That was brutal. My daughter went to university. That was brutal. And I spent 4 months in lockdown living alone, where I was kind of isolated from the world. So I've had to learn a lot about mental health. And I've had to work with a lot of sales executives and SDRs who are struggling with isolation and struggling with mental health as well. So if you're a manager or a director, people who work in HR and heads of people are very, very good at this. But a lot of sales directors, especially men, are not very good at this. You've got to take care of your staff. Okay, do not start your sales meeting going, okay, where are we? You start a one-to-one meeting asking your sales executive or SDR or your account executive, how are you? And you be genuine and you pause and you wait for them to answer. You don't go, hey, are you okay? Good. Okay, where are the figures? People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. You've got to take care of people. And for people in sales, every morning, don't check your email first thing. Don't check the news first thing. And don't wake up, put your pajama bottoms on, put your shirt on, and go to your computer and start working. Get a good morning routine. You know, success leaves clues. Successful people have great morning routines. Go for a walk, cycle, run, meditate, do yoga, Pilates, HIIT training, do something before you start work, but don't just get out of bed and go straight to your laptop, which a lot of people are doing now because there's no morning commute. Sorry, that was a very long answer, but I felt there was so much I wanted to say in that.
No, that was really great insight. Thank you so much for sharing all that, especially about mental health, because I definitely feel like that's a big topic of discussion for 2020. Selfishly, I'm just curious, do you have any of your favorite books or podcasts that you've read or listened to this year that you would recommend for everyone listening?
Yeah, there's quite a range. I mean, this year with podcasts, this is an old one, but it's still brilliant. I mean, in fact, the two best ones are old ones. So Sales Influence by Victor Antonio. Will Barron, the Great Salesman podcast. You know, Sam Dunning, Sam's Growth Show is very good. He's had Jeffrey Gitmer on this year. He's had Jeb Blunt on this year. You know, Chris Murray, the Extremely Successful Sales Club. These are all great podcasts that I really enjoy. In terms of books, Daniel Disney's book came out end of last year, The £1 Million LinkedIn Message, but it's still hugely relevant. Matt Sykes' book, it's called Converted. I'm halfway through Jeb Blunt's book, Virtual Selling. It just arrived a few days ago. Fantastic book. These are books that will help you massively in sales. There's actually a reading list actually on everybodyworksinsales.com, my website. Scroll down to the homepage. There's about 40 books I recommend, personal development, sales, biographies, all of which will help you generate more sales.
Oh, that's great. Niraj, I'll actually include that link in the recap of the webinar post for everyone that's listening, in case you're curious where that is.
Problem. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just curious for everyone else. Dale, do you have any podcasts or books that you'd recommend for your sales team in 2020 or 2021, I guess?
I have a whole list of, kind of like Niraj was talking about, like a whole list of different books that I have salespeople read and different podcasts that I have them listen to. But interestingly, they're not really typically about sales. Most of the time they're around human psychology. Most of the time they're around human behavior. Most of the time they are more adventurous and they're listening, pleasure that the student will get instead of the aha moments that some people think they're getting from listening to a sales podcast. And the reason I put it that way is because what salespeople need to tap into for themselves is their own brilliance. Right. And sitting back and listening to somebody else's ideas is cool. Like, I don't mind people listening to Selling Local, little plug there for my own podcast, but I also don't care if people don't have time for it and that they would rather listen to a murder mystery podcast because it excites them and it connects them to who they are as a human. But that's what our podcast is all about. It's all about people getting to a more relevant place for themselves and with themselves as a salesperson. When we're so consumed by sales and everybody's opinion on it, then we become diluted and we become part of the noise that everybody else is causing in the first place. It's about being loud, but it's also about being coherent with your message first and foremost. And so for me, really, it's about, and I like what Niraj was talking about, it's about people connecting with themselves, like getting spiritually fit, understanding that like what a morning routine really is, that it's about getting yourself prepared for what is to be a battle, especially if you're someone that struggles with things like depression or anxiety, which I've battled for my entire life. I tried to commit suicide at 15 years old. My mom saved my life by coming home, from work early. And so the idea of being alone in 2020, like we set up small support groups right away and said, we're not going to allow this to happen to people. We're not going to allow it to happen to ourselves. And I still got like right to the edge inside of that whole process. And that's a consistency that we have to also identify for ourselves, and that we have to speak out loud. Your bravery, Niraj, is awesome in speaking your truth, because men, especially, over the age of 30, especially too, typically when they're in C-level positions, running businesses, whatever that looks like, they're more susceptible to killing themselves than most. And we have to talk about that. Right. We have to have clear communication about these things, because I wouldn't be here if I wasn't good at talking about it. But it was really a silent, discussion for a long time with people. And the only people I was good at talking about it to were my mom and my dad. That was it. I felt embarrassed about it, speaking about it around anybody else, until I lost my dad in 2016. And these things are all relevant for one reason, because like who I am and what makes me unique and makes me authentic, radically authentic, is something that goes way beyond how good I am at sales. I'm good at sales because I love God, because I love my wife, because I love my family, because I'm passionate about who I am, because I believe that I'm on this earth for a purpose. And when you can get yourself to those moments, like no book, no podcast can take you there. You have to do it yourself in the first place. You have to be willing to go there as well. You have to be willing to be open-minded and to speak truths that normally are taboo. Like, oh, I don't really like to talk about that. Too bad. You got to, if you want to be better, if you want to level up, if you want to become something that makes an impact on your community. If you just want to be a salesperson that collects a check and hits quota and goes on President's Club every other year, that's cool. If that's the life that you want to live, but that's not mine. That's not who Dale Dupree wants to be. That's not who most rebels want to be either. They want to be something legendary. They want to choose people over products, community over commission checks, experiences over performing pitches. And because of that, we constantly preach self-development and getting away from the idea of you have to listen to all these sales things or read all these sales books to become better. They're great things. I love Daniel Disney's book, by the way. It's a great book, right? But the side of it that people need to also have a rebel mindset about is that how does that make you you? The two books I'm reading right now are both Star Wars books too, in case anybody was wondering.
Yeah, I totally agree with Dale as well. And I think it's a little bit controversial what I'm going to say, but I work like 60 hours a week on my business. So in my spare time, I don't want to read sales books because I'm learning about sales all the time. I'm on webinars like this where I'm learning tons, and I'm learning by doing, and like sales is all around me all the time. And if people want to read sales books in that spare time, that's great. But I'm like Dale, I read books that are helping my mindset. And I actually had a conversation with a customer recently because they're a head of marketing. So generally, a lot of our customers, we get through the door with like heads of sales. So I was trying to interview some of our customers who are heads of marketing, like, what do you like about Growth Genie? What do you like about what we do? And they said it's mindset hacking, right? Essentially, you're hacking the minds of the people that we're working with to not take no for an answer or to be very resilient, essentially. And so that a lot of that comes down to, like Dale said, work on yourself, strengthen your mind. And as soon as you strengthen your mind, you're going to become so much better at sales. Because one of the big things that kills us as salespeople is the ego. I was actually thinking about starting a community soon called like Ego Killers, because when your ego gets in the way, so you receive an objection and you're like, oh, this person doesn't like me, whatever it is, that's going to stop you as sales. So you're attaching yourself to that outcome. Whereas if you're making it more about the customer and not your own ego, you're going to be a lot more successful. So I'm like Dale, I love to read like personal development books in my spare time rather than sales books. And I've got one called Explorations of the Frontiers of Human Consciousness, which I read last year, which is like a very heavy book, but really changed my life. And I'll put the link in the comments there.
Yeah, Michael, I'll bug you after this because I want to take a look at that book as well. Dan, just curious on your side, any types of books or podcasts that you're interested in or that you think other salespeople would find interesting?
Yeah, there's like, I'm very similar to Dale on this. Like, I like to read broad, not always deep, but read broad. Like especially in my position as a sales leader, I have to know how to work with a product team, with a marketing team, with an operations team, with a customer success team. I can't just be reading about sales all the time. And the thing is, a lot of salespeople think in like the opposite way. They'll be like, hey, I need to read about sales tactics. Sales tactics change so frequently. Every quarter, something new comes out and this is better and this new tool changed the market. So now this is the tactic. So a lot of the times it comes down to like reading stuff that's about technique. Like, I'm reading a really good book right now. It's like The Secrets of Question-Based Selling. It's all about technique. So when you're reading something like that, it never goes out of style because the tactic might change, but the technique won't. And then the other stuff is whatever's going to make you way more knowledgeable about how your customers are operating. So if you're selling to marketing and you're reading a bunch of sales books, by the way, you're not going to book a ton of meetings, because marketing people typically don't like, at most companies, larger organizations, they don't like necessarily salespeople. And if all you're doing is reading about sales tactics and not reading about marketing and how to make marketing better, then you're probably not going to be able to empathize and relate. So I tend to go really broad to figure out how can I better work with other departments or other prospects, and trying to figure out, okay, what are the different topics that I need to know and have enough functional knowledge to be like able to actually have a conversation about it. And then the rest of the stuff is very much around like myself, like Atomic Habits is another book that I'm reading right now. I always have two books on the go. I read in the morning and I read at night, and they're not the same book. I like to mingle my books so that it formulates better ideas. That's how you develop strategic thinking, by the way. It's reading multiple things at the same time, not one single topic at a time. But like books like Atomic Habits, books like Mindsets is a really, really good one. Like stuff that can help you just either better understand yourself or help you put systems in place that will make it easier for you to accomplish stuff.
Nice.
Can I butt into that real quick and just say that like one of the things that's really important too is that I'm going to reach out to Daniel after this and be like, yo, so what book would you recommend that I read right now? And maybe I haven't read one that he'll recommend. And so like having mentor groups and peer groups of people that are, like, once they know how you think and what it is you're trying to level up, to have them breathe life into you. Like shout out to Steve Clayton and Darcy Smythe out in Australia who run the Sales Game. It's an awesome organization. They send me books all the time and just go, hey, we read this and thought you'd like it. And when they do that, and when people are feeding into your life as well too, and making you better through that perspective of perception, right? When they see and hear what it is that you prefer and how you're trying to level up, then it can take you to a whole nother level. So that's another piece of the puzzle I would tell everybody to do, is find accountability through other individuals that are trying to level up like you.
That's awesome. That's a great tip. We're getting short on time here, everyone. So if there's anyone listening, feel free to answer or post questions in the Q&A, and we'll share them with the speakers. Currently, we don't have any questions, so feel free to throw them in there. So I'll keep watching that. And I've got one last question on my list for everyone. So Dan, I'm just curious, do you have any tips or suggestions on how you're opening up the pipeline for Q4 and how you're closing more deals in Q4?
Yeah, for us, opening up a pipeline in Q4 is like, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. Outbound's been working really well. Like we were predominantly an inbound company, and then the lockdown hit and it was like, holy shit, like we need to have more than one type of lead prospecting channel, right? So we spent a lot of time this year on outbound. The thing that I would say for opening up pipeline, and this, I've been very consistent saying this throughout this year is not the time to go after your total addressable market. It is the time to only go after your ideal client profile. Doesn't matter that you can sell to all these different types of industries and this one might work, this one, like focus only on the best, very, very, very best customers that you can attract, because you're going to be wasting a lot of time trying to go after everything else. And it's kind of a little bit counterintuitive thinking like, oh, if leads are so precious, why are we limiting ourselves to a smaller market? You're just going to get way more consistent with your messaging. You're just going to get a lot more traction if you go after something small than trying to go too big. And then for closing pipeline, we pay a lot of attention to engagement metrics in the cycle. So anything that, like, you should know your average sales cycle, how long is it? Anything that's above 5% of your average sales cycle in terms of like, hey, this hasn't closed and we're now 5% over our average, that's a risk. You know that deal is not going the way it's supposed to go. So we pay a lot of attention to engagement metrics inside of our sales cycles. Like, are we following up enough? Like, we notice that when we close deals, like we're following up with the account more than once a day, like across multiple stakeholders. When we lose deals to competitors, we're following up once every 2 days. And when we lose deals to the status quo, we're following up once every 3 days. So there's a lot of little things like that you should be paying attention to. Most of us all have systems that allow us to get these types of metrics. So we look at that. We look at, is somebody opening up a proposal? How often are they opening it up? Are they spending time on the pricing page and hovering there? Because if they are, then they are probably worrying about the price, and you need to pick up the phone and call them. So it's a lot of just looking at, okay, how are the engagements going in between the calls? And are we getting engagement back from them? Like if we're sending a ton of emails out and we're not getting replies, we know that deal's at risk. It's not gonna close. So let's focus on the ones that have the proper momentum.
Awesome. That's really great insight to track those engagement metrics. I really like that. Michael, I'm curious from your end, are you doing anything specific to close or open more deals in the pipeline for Q4?
Yeah, there's some tactics on the opening side, which I can run through just to give Dan a shout out and Proposify a shout out. What he was talking about, he obviously didn't want to pitch Proposify, but you can actually do that with Proposify. So you can, if you send out a proposal, you can see every time someone viewing it and like what they're viewing essentially. I don't want to go into too much of that now. In terms of you've kind of two questions here, right? There's the closing and the opening. So on the opening side, there's a couple of tactics we kind of preach to our clients. They've been working for us to grow our business. They've been working for our clients. So one is think about what can you give away for free as a piece of content that's extremely useful to your buyers, right? So we have two bits of content that I know that generally sales and marketing leaders, who are the people we're trying to sell to, love, which is one is 30 touch cadence, which we talked about at the beginning, Anna. And the other is like a playbook template for like training and onboarding people and giving them better messaging. So we use those, and I don't even get the tactic that we use now. We don't actually give it to them. We create interest in it. So I could say, hey, I noticed you're hiring SDRs at Leadfeeder. We've got a playbook template that can help you onboard those SDRs when they're hired. Someone's just got to reply yes, right? The good thing about that is often if they reply yes on email, their phone number's in the signature, and then you can give them a call and start having a conversation regarding their playbooks, etc. So that's like a tactic we're using. So that's obviously an example I've given, could apply to any industry. Think about a piece of content you have that's like super valuable. Speak with your marketing team, ask them like, what's the top bit of content we have at the moment? And then create interest in that. Like you have a teaser for a film. Think about like a message that you can send that's like, oh, I want that. And then you give it to them and you can start a bit of a conversation. So that's been working well from an opening perspective. Another thing is like polls and surveys. So you've probably seen like polls on LinkedIn. I discussed this when we did the last webinar, Anna, which is essentially part of the problem when you're doing outbound cold is you don't actually understand what the pains of your buyers are. So you do a quick survey related to whatever you do. So say you're selling something related to like email security. What's the number one way you're getting hacked on email right now? Give them 4 options and then they tell you what it is. And then you can create very relevant messaging related to that. So that's a good tactic we're using for opening. And in terms of closing, how we're closing deals in the pipeline. Again, I think we talked about this earlier. Like, I think the human relationship with closing is really important because like once you've had that first conversation, stay top of mind. If you know the person likes dogs, like you talked about, like send them a WhatsApp or a text with like a photo of the dog. And then another thing, what we've been doing, it's been working really well. I would like people ghosting me. So like we've sent them a proposal, whatever, 10 touches, can't get through to them. I go on their LinkedIn. Sometimes people's content doesn't appear on your LinkedIn, so you have to be quite proactive. Like go into their posts and like write something, comment on their post, but not just general, like this is great, like write a super thoughtful comment and then magically these people are starting to reply. So that's another thing, like it's about being different. So get out of the usual channels of like phoning, LinkedIn Messenger, emails, etc., and be like, can I comment on this person's Twitter or like LinkedIn, etc.? Like go that extra step, and that can really help with closing.
That's really great insight, Michael. I've actually seen a lot of uptick in LinkedIn with those specific comments, but you're right, the comment has to be thoughtful in order to actually achieve any engagement. So that's really great insight. Niraj, I'm curious from your side, how are you, do you have any suggestions for opening and closing pipeline in Q4?
Certainly. In addition to what everybody has said, which I 100% agree and support, use video. I embrace video now, and I get double, sometimes triple the engagement on LinkedIn with video than I do with just a normal post. Yesterday, I had my biggest ever post on a Sunday by a mile. It was a 1-minute video about persistence. That was it. And I couldn't believe how popular it was. In fact, I'll share it before we go because it was so good. But then people comment and you comment back, and then I message them saying, thank you so much for your comment. You know, what else are you struggling with at the moment? Or what else do you like about the post? Or what more do you want to know from me? And these are great ways to open deals. And the second one is, I mentioned earlier, the master classes I do. I mean, you can call them webinars. I prefer the term masterclass, and I charge lots of money for it because I want clients to invest thousands of pounds in my coaching. And so that's very strategic for me. So I get incoming inquiries from masterclasses. So embrace video, run high quality, high ticket masterclasses. And that's great for opening. For closing, that's it. That's it. Stop closing by email. Just stop it. It doesn't work. Stop trying to close by email. Stop it. Just pick up the phone and talk to people. Personally, I find 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock in the afternoon the best times to prospect. It used to be later on in the afternoon, but now people spend their days with meetings, webinars, more meetings, client meetings. Lunchtime, they're often on social media. By 2 o'clock, they're starting to get quite tired with just staring at the screen all day. So that's when I pick up the phone. Between 3 and 4 o'clock, a lot of my clients are doing the school run because so many work from home. And I pick up the phone again after 4:30 and I make phone calls again. But between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock, you can rarely get hold of me because the phone's attached to my ear. You close deals by phone or by Zoom, but don't do it by email. And don't email people saying, did you get my proposal? It's lazy and it's lame. Don't do it.
That's awesome, Niraj. That's really great insight. And I'll definitely have to bug you about that video piece because I'd love to include that in the wrap up. Dale, from your side, do you have any tips or suggestions or advice on how you're opening and closing pipeline in Q4?
Yeah, I'm just going to come back to mindset and experiences, and I'll expand on that a little bit more. I think that all the things that the gentleman just laid out are very important, and they're fun and they're innovative and they're great ideas for salespeople. And what I would add to it is that like sales should be a lifestyle. The way that you are conducting yourself on a daily basis is all about what you're building from the perspective of how others perceive you. And what is that? Well, that is the idea of the way that the community looks at you, which is a reputation. A reputation in sales is the most important thing. If you want to get stuff in the pipe and start closing it, build a personal brand, pursue content on LinkedIn for yourself, tell your story, change the game every single day. And it's not about this idea of, I don't want people to hear me constantly saying, things like be a rebel and do it different and think, oh, that's the play. It's not a play. It's who you really truly are, because business says, send an email saying, did you get my proposal? And that's not really what you should be doing. You should be creating experiences for people, or like Niraj eloquently stated, just pick up the freaking phone and call somebody and say, hey, like, you ready to move forward? But the other side of it is, like, how can you change your outbound game to create an inbound game? That's what we always play. And I played it as a copier rep. I sold copy machines for 14 years. I was $1 million producer, and I was the #1 salesperson in my company, and then also in the United States for certain manufacturers as well too. And I'm gonna tell you right now that a copy machine is boring. It's bland. It's stale. People don't even really know what they do in most cases because they do too much. And all somebody wants it to do is work, right? It's the problems that we tend to kind of forget about. Instead, we think, oh, my product is so sexy, this is all I want to talk about, right? That's what the sales world tells us to do. And all you got to do is rebel against the traditions of sales, because they're not basic human behaviors in the first place. And so really being relevant, right? Creating familiarity. I've heard the term curiosity thrown around. Like, you need to be curious as a salesperson, but you also need to cause an undeniable amount of curiosity. When you've got such a good outbound game that you have people calling you and saying, how do I get started? That's when you have touched on something that most people don't, that legendary status of a rebel and of a salesperson, getting to that place of becoming so relevant that people almost have that FOMO concept going for them, that fear of missing out. Because right now you're just a commodity. You're just another email. You're just another proposal. You're just another, salesperson that's a fly on the wall to them, or, part of the cattle in the bullpen. And that's how it feels to some salespeople as well too. And if you're hearing that, I'm here to tell you right now that is not how you're supposed to be feeling. It is not the true nature of a salesperson, but that standing up, standing tall, and standing out is important. That's what authenticity is all about. So giving experiences through your radical and authentic self is important. And furthermore, creating that familiarity that I've heard a couple times thrown around in here, but doing it through action. Right. So when you pick up the phone, you call somebody and you use things like a LinkedIn post or something personal that you can find on that person. It goes beyond just saying like, hey, I saw that you went to this college, or, hey, I was reading this post about how you like growth. You know, it's about really connecting with people in those moments and making them feel that what you're talking about is worth their time, and causing that undeniable curiosity, and you'll level up as a salesperson.
That's awesome, Dale. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to wrap this up really quick. I just wanted to thank all the panel of experts. Thank you so much for joining us. Niraj, Dale, Dan, Michael, I really appreciate it. Everyone, I hope you go and check out their companies, go stalk them. After this webinar, we will share the video on YouTube. So you'll get a recap. We'll also do a blog post recap with some of the assets that we talked about in this piece. So stay tuned for more, and thank you all so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
Thanks
Thank you so
everyone.
much.
Have a good day.